Yeah, I'll start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another IWA's Intermittent Water Supply Specialist Group's webinar. Welcome to all of you. Just for your information, this year we are starting our webinars with a number of webinars that are organized in collaboration with other specialist groups. And this is based on the suggestions we have received from our members, and also identifying that some of the challenges that we are facing are interdisciplinary, and to tackle this, we need to collaborate with other groups. So as part of the new series, the first talk, which is today, we are doing it in collaboration with IWA's specialist group on public and customer communication team. It's my great pleasure. We have got two excellent speakers, Dr. Fatima Ajia, a lecturer in environmental management from UK, and also Victor-Lucian Croitoru. He is the chair of IWA's specialist group on public and customer communication, and he is chair of Somash Water from Romania. They are going to deliver two talks, and at the end there will be opportunity for you participants to ask questions, raise some comments. Please feel free to add your suggestions or comments, questions on the chat, or there will be opportunity to turn your microphone on and ask your questions if you prefer that option. Either way is fine. So I welcome Victor-Lucian Croitoru, chair of the IWS specialist group, to welcome you to this talk before we start the talks. Victor.
Thank you, Razia. Welcome everybody from IWS specialist group on intermittent water supply from our specialist group of public and customer communication, other guests. I'm very happy that we started with cooperation with another SG. This was in our management plan after the new management committee of the specialist group on public and customer communication was elected last year. And we hope to not only to start, but to boost the cooperation with other SGs, since, as Razia pointed out, the cooperation and the issues in the strategic objective, between the strategic objectives of IWA are interdisciplinary. That being said, I give the floor to my colleague, member of the MC in Public and Customer Communication, Dr. Fatima Ajia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. Hello, everyone. I recognize that we are joining from different parts of the world, so good day to you all. Today, I'm going to be talking about water efficiency engagement during hot summers, focusing on the case of the drought that we had here in the UK in 2022, so about 2 years ago now. And this is very important because droughts are one of the ways in which we are experiencing the climate crisis, and it's playing out right before our eyes. And in talking about the case of 2022, the aim really is to offer a lens through which we examine communications, because very often when we look at communicative practices in the water sector, regardless of what geographical context it is, we are often looking at whether something's been done in a good or bad way. However, there are other robust ways to look at communicative practices and hopefully identify opportunities for improvement. So today I'm going to be touching on 5 things. In the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to be explaining the concepts of droughts in themselves, because droughts can be very complex. And I'm also going to be touching on the 2022 drought in the UK. So why was it particularly concerning? Because that's not the first drought we experienced, and it's not going to be the last anyway. And I'm also going to be talking about how the impacts were felt and continue to be felt. And in the third aspect, I'm going to be talking about the concept of water efficiency engagement. So how do we go from communications to public engagement to mobilization? And I'm also going to be talking about a model for looking at communicative water practices, which is the MAC model. It's a heuristic, basically, a message actor channel model. And then in the last aspect, we will be dissecting communications in the UK during the 2022 drought. And I will be talking about some of the identified gaps and alternative communicative practices that we could adopt going forward. So what are droughts? I think everyone on this call must know that, the drought is something that eventually is visible. You feel it in everyday life when it does come about. However, there's no single definition for droughts because their nature, their timing, and their impacts on people and the environment and on businesses and on the agricultural sector in particular can often vary. So for example, you may have droughts which occur very quickly and they're very intense. And you would typically notice that we have a drought, maybe when you hear that there's a hot, dry summer. But you may also have some droughts that are silent and they're creeping very slowly. So they slowly develop over multiple seasons of low rainfall. But the universal agreement is that droughts are caused by a period of low rainfall. Basically, there's a scarcity of water. But there are 3 main types of droughts that we recognize here in the UK. I understand that there are other ways of defining droughts, but I'm honing in on these 3 main droughts that are relevant for us. We have the agricultural drought, which occurs when there's not enough rainfall, and as a result, there's not enough moisture in soils to support crop production and farming practices. So for example, to support irrigation. So you often find farmers being one of the segments of the public to be quick to feel the impact of such droughts. Another type of drought is the environmental drought. And that occurs when there's a lack of rainfall, and that absence of rainfall has a detrimental impact on the environment and our ecology. So for example, sometimes you would hear that maybe the rivers are drying up, for example, or the fishes are dying. That may be as a result of an environmental drought. There's the third type of drought, which is the water supply drought, which occurs when there's low rainfall, and then water companies then typically become very concerned about how do we supply enough water to meet the need of our customers. What I should point out is that droughts sometimes occur independently, separately. So you may have one type of drought, but sometimes there are multiple types of droughts going on at the same time. So you may have drought that is impacting agricultural production. You may have fishes dying at the same time. You may also have areas around the country facing serious water stress now being exacerbated, and then they have water scarcity. So that can happen. And we often, with the 2022 drought, we can see multiple things going on. What I should mention is that in the UK, we have the Environment Agency, which is our regulatory body essentially, and the Environmental Agency monitors certain indicators of drought to determine what level of drought an area is in. So these indicators could be rainfall, groundwater levels, reservoir levels, our ecology, public supplies, the flows of rivers, and depending on the certain levels for a certain area, the National Drought Group, which is chaired by the Environment Agency, and then it has other stakeholders like water companies, not-for-profits in the water sector, all in that group. Together, they decide what level of drought we are in, an area is in. The level can vary from being in prolonged dry weather to being recovering from drought. So we could have drought, we could have severe drought in between. Okay, so what happened in 2022? As I mentioned earlier, the UK has been facing prolonged droughts over the past decades. We had drought in 1997, we had in 2003, 2006, 2010, between 2010 and 2012, actually, there was a prolonged drought there. We had between 2018 and 2019. But what made 2022 so peculiar is that some parts of the UK faced unprecedented weather conditions. 8 out of 14 areas in England, which would be a region in our country, experienced this drought. So as seen on the map here, there was virtually no rainfall in large areas of southern England. So England is a region in the country. And the lowest reservoir levels we saw in 2022 was the level of reservoir capacity that we saw in 2022 was the lowest we'd seen in 30 years. In fact, England's reservoir level at the end of July 2022 was 65% of its normal capacity, so the combined capacity for all our reservoirs. So this was quite alarming, really. And what did people see? Because all the things I've been talking about is quite theoretical. When you walk around in your everyday life and you meet Jane and Joe on the street, they don't know about, the comparison between what happened now and 30 years ago and what the reservoir levels were. But what they did get to experience is depleting reservoir levels, because the farmers started to see things like baked soils. So they began to become concerned about crop failures and challenges that would come with that when trying to harvest. Well, also people who lived around areas where they could access reservoirs, for example, this is the Baitlian Reservoir in West Yorkshire, could see that the water levels were quite low, and they could also just see dry, cracked earth beginning to form. So, of course, there became an official declaration of drought, and with that came a lot of clamor in the media, so people heard about it in that way. But what also happened is that millions of people, in fact, at the height, I think initially 16 million, but at the height of it, about 30 million people did have hosepipe bans instated in their area. So, of course, this was disruptive for people's lives. What we also saw was water companies having to produce extra hundreds of millions of liters of water to be able to meet the daily needs of people. But what we were also seeing was public announcements, like I mentioned in the media earlier, for people to avoid baths, to have shorter showers, to only use full loads of laundry. And in fact, people were advised to only do their dishes, run their dishwasher maximum of once a day. So all of this put together, you can imagine it's understandable that there was public panic. And how did people see that? There were empty shelves in stores. So we have our Tesco's and Aldi's, which would be our convenience stores where people go to shop for food. We saw empty shelves there. And in fact, in Aldi in London, there's an Aldi store in London where they put up posters limiting the number of items, water that people can buy, just because there was panic buying. As you can see in the photograph, there's a lady just loading the trolley with water when the limit actually is 5 bottles per customer. So, of course, to move away from being theoretical, in real life, people do see the impacts of incidents such as the 2022 drought in form of infrastructural disruption, disruption to the environment, or disruption to our communities as well. And in fact, a year later, in 2023, the Environment Agency continued to report that we were still feeling the impact of that 2022 drought in many ways. So, for example, our natural environment was reported to continue to be in recovering state. Parts of our regions, like in East Anglia, were still in drought in 2023. Devon and Cornwall, which is another area that was in drought in 2022, continued to remain in drought in 2023 and was even reported to only recover based on anticipated rainfall by end of 2023. So you can see that these events sometimes can have longer term impacts. And as a result of that, the Environment Agency, as you can imagine, put in place a plethora of measures. So they were monitoring and trying to maintain license extractions. We're running water transfer schemes between regions that didn't have enough. We're also addressing environmental problems, so like aerating the rivers to save the fishes. We're also cracking down on water wastage through leakage, because leakage is the real problem in the UK. But we were also supporting farmers to be able to store water on their farmland, so whether it is through rainwater harvesting. But what is relevant for today's discussion is that the Environment Agency, through the National Drought Group, was supporting water efficiency campaigns to encourage people to use less water. You may be wondering, why is it important? Why was the campaign one of the key measures that was put in place? It's because droughts are actually symptomatic of wider problems that have been left unaddressed. Our water crisis isn't accidental. It hasn't just happened out of the blues. It is actually due to the impact of climate change. It's due to the impact of population growth and the increasing demand that accompanies population growth. So the climate crisis, for example, is an anthropogenic crisis. You know, it's because of the impact of man on the planet. So as you know, in the UK, industrialization, consumerism, all of these things are driving our need to use resources, and these has impact on our water resources. Water is, after all, the medium through which the climate crisis will be most especially felt. But there's something else that, you know, responsibilizes you and I, the average person. Our water usage has really increased. In the UK, the average person uses 143 liters of water a day. That is 3 times the amount of water that was being used by an average person in the 1960s. So this is about 4 or 5 decades ago. And look at that change. And you may wonder, what happened? Well, it's all of these things I'm talking about: industrialization, consumerism, but it's also our lifestyles. We have all these contemporary lifestyles and habits that shape how we use water. So, for example, when the weather is hot, you see everyone rushing to garden centers. We are gardening, we are using water outdoors, in our paddling pools, we have baths, we have jacuzzis. We also have all of this awareness around health and well-being, which also drive us in using water, exercising, self-care. But we also subscribe to these new norms around social status. So having particular water-intensive material goods in our homes, but also our norms around cleanliness, cleaning the house, keeping ourselves clean, our own personal hygiene, showering regularly. All of these things impact how we use water. So it is in the realization of these underlying issues that we see the National Drought Group was supporting the stakeholder organizations within the group to promote water efficiency. So the question is, how was this done? Well, to begin with, I want to share the conceptual framework around how I'm looking at the 2022 drought event. So I'd done some work previously in 2020 where I was defining what water efficiency engagement, which just simply means public engagement in water efficiency. And it's all around engagement with the public, whether it is educational, informational engagement, and or technical engagement to motivate people to use less water or to just engineer people into using less water. And as part of this work as well, I defined the MAC model of communicative water practices. So it's about, when looking at communications about water, looking through the lens of what the message is, how it's been framed, who's the sponsor of the message, who are the publics that the message are being targeted with. And together, those form the actors in that framework, but also looking at the channel, how do the sponsors send the message to the publics, and do they actually try to get any understanding back? So this framework really aligns with regulatory guidance around communication in water. So you find Ofwat, another of our regulatory body, has guidance around who to engage, how to engage, and when to engage. And that is essentially what the MAC model is about. So in interrogating communications, is about asking key questions in relation to the message. So asking things about, what is the motivation for that engagement? What kinds of rhetoric are being used? The use of social science techniques in explicitly in whether persuading the public, for example, or even using social comparison to motivate the public, dispelling myths around water, reinforcing attitudes that are very beneficial for water conservation. And in looking at the people who are being engaged, who is intended to be engaged, what expectations are placed on the people who are intended to be engaged, and are they sought to be understood, or are they just being told what to do? And in terms of the channel, what this framework allows you to explore is what kinds of mediums are being used. Are they supporting unilateral communication or bidirectional communication? And how are these channels effective for long-term behavioral change? Because if you recall, I did say that a lot of our problems around demand is our contemporary ways of using water. Okay, so what did I find? I should say that this is not a published work at all. This is just some research that I've done very recently in the last few weeks to actually present at this seminar. So it's more of an informative research rather than a published one. So what did I find, really? So what I found is that we have this National Drought Group, which is almost like an authority for cascading drought information to stakeholder organizations, and they're also there to give strategic direction for campaigns. But in that group, I focused on 3 stakeholder organizations. I looked at 3 water companies in the 3 key drought areas. So Thames Water, Southern Water, and Southwest Water, which operate in London, Kent, and in Devon and Cornwall, which I had initially mentioned when I showed you the map. And then I also looked at some customer-centric groups. So we have WaterWise, which is a leading authority on water efficiency in the UK, and they do really fantastic work at making sure that we get to the nitty-gritty of what water efficiency is about, which is about using less. We also have the Consumer Council of Water, which champion the cause of the customer, but they are equally passionate about driving behavioral change in water efficiency. And then we have MOSO, which is also another organization which focuses more on the non-residential bit. If you recall, I mentioned that farmers are another segment of the public that are highly impacted by water scarcity. Well, what did I find? I found that in terms of communication, we had communication typically informing the public and alarming them. So the motivation was to inform and to alarm rather than to invite public participation to do something. So if you see, I went back to look at also what was in the media. So I looked at credible 3 quality media outlets, The Guardian and The Times. And I also looked at the Mail as well, which is a very popular one with the public because not everyone reads The Guardian, of course. So what I found is that we have in the beginning around March, there was just informing messages. If you can see, there's this Times article around how to prepare for drought, but it doesn't really say anything about how to amend your lifestyles to make sure that you're using less water. It's about, oh, this alarming thing is coming. How do we prepare? Even in The Guardian, it was about alarming rather than behavioral change. What I also found in terms of communication is that the customer-centric groups had messaging around usage practices. So if you see that arrow, they had messages around water efficiency in relation to agriculture, how you save water and save energy and the environment, or what you do outdoors to use less water, and how to value water. So not necessarily about doing anything, it's just about having more connection to water. The challenge, however, was that these customer-centric groups do seem to communicate. So their messaging seems to be intended to be for segmented publics. So bill payers, people cooking, people flushing, people having a shower. However, the channels that they end up using are social media, and even the water companies rely on social media and websites. And although this is good for dispersing information, it's not really helpful in the sense that it generalizes publics, excludes people who are not online. Everyday people don't go on Twitter, on their water company's website to say, what's my water company telling me today, right? And also it sort of conditions people or positions people as users of water. So there's an echo chamber. The people who follow these water companies are people who already believe in water efficiency online, right? So that's the main challenge. But what I've also found in terms of the water companies that at this point they're in a crisis. So you see Thames Water just sending a message to say, well, demand is high, you may experience problems. And in some way that is good because it shows that there are consequences to using a lot of water. And it resonates with the public because they have that in their hands. They know that there's a consequence for this drought. The only challenge that I could find with that is that there's that temporality around the promotion of actions during drought, as though, well, this is only there's going to be restrictions. And then when rainfall comes again, people just go back to everyday life. Also, there's a lot of articles, like I've said, in newspapers, on radio, on television, in the media. But what I found is that they were all around being, sensational news. And because they were not industry-led, they weren't sector-led. So what it meant is that the media could put their own spin on the message, and then in the middle somewhere say, we interviewed somebody from University of Reading and they said this, or we interviewed somebody from Waterwise. I think there are opportunities to improve where key stakeholders try to now drive the narrative through these channels that are very dispersive. I should also mention that water companies were going into households and having home visits at the time. At the time, I was also doing home visits with plumbers, and I went to hundreds of households at the time. But because there wasn't joined up working, there wasn't a lot of conversation around the drought, especially when we are visiting people in Newcastle who don't have hosepipe bans. So of course, when we mention it, we say there's an urgency, but because our engagements are not typically well delivered in terms of face-to-face in people's homes, it doesn't have that gravity that it should have. Also, the water industry at the time, the sector was facing low public trust around sewage disposal in our rivers, shareholders, and all sort of things. It didn't feel like the time to be asking people to take responsibility because people were looking to water companies to now take more transparent responsibility for their actions. Okay, just very quickly. So from what I've identified, the red boxes, the red cells are the areas where I think, well, disruptive interventions are key for grabbing public attention, but communication, in order for communication to be sustained, communication has to be continued for that attention to be sustained. And so it may be worth considering all of these red areas and what we can do as a sector in order to improve communications to sort of minimize those barriers. So some alternative practices that I'm highlighting today center around the message, the actor and the channel. First of all, in terms of let's move away from using that information deficit model and sensationalizing water scarcity to actually normalizing water efficiency, making it become antisocial to use water in a disparate way any time of the year, but also tailoring our communications to the behaviors. So using the social model rather than the information deficit model, identifying those behaviors, emotions, and attitudes that underlie people's ways of being, ways of using waters, because we don't have time today, but there's, lots of underlying theories around how people use water and why people use water. So using those knowledges to expand our practice perspective. So we're not just saying, don't use your dishwasher more than once a day, but we are speaking to the behaviors around washing dishes, the emotions attached to washing dishes, for example. Also, I do think new segments of publics needs to be identified away from practices, so not just showerers and gardeners, but using social science understanding to create new segments of publics around behaviors, emotions, and values. I also think that we need new sponsors, new voices that are not our formal voices. So we need informal voices. I've often, during the summers, I'd go through London and you would hear TfL, for example, always announcing, keep yourself hydrated. And I'm always thinking how powerful it would be to plug into a station's control room and be able to talk about not just hydrate yourself, but actually that we do have a water scarcity problem in London. It's a good way to keep people aware. So we need to find cross-sectoral ways of collaborating to address, to reach our audience. So that's the finding atypical sponsors. I do think we need to diversify our mediums. I just talked about one medium that's been playing in my mind, but I've never done anything about it. And I do think we need to move away from just telling, being informational, to mobilizing people, to be wardings, to be champions, to spread the message further, but also to engage with all the stakeholder groups on water efficiency. I think unconventional channels would allow us to continue to engage about what's needed, whether it's about the climate, and to engage in different spaces. And sometimes channels don't have to be people and places, they could be objects as well. Okay, I'm going to stop now. And at the end, we would have the opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to hand over to Victor, who is the Director of Public Relations at a water company in Romania. Is Victor here? Yeah. Over to you, Victor.
You are muted, Victor.
Yes, I'm trying now to share my screen, but message said host disabled the participant screen sharing. Okay. I'm Asta? Right. Wait, so together with Razia and Joe, we choose as theme for this webinar communication related to water supply in extreme condition for a good reason, because those intermittent water supply situations are those who require the most and the best communication. I work with a water utility, the second largest regional water utility in Romania, and I experienced firsthand how difficult can be communication and awareness, unfolding awareness campaigns in situation of extreme conditions. Of course, there are various extreme conditions which can influence and impact on water supply, causing intermittent water supply, extreme cold, of course, insufficient investment in network modernization, but also conflict, also the torrential or catastrophic downpours who are have the possibility to pollute local water sources, wells, and so forth. But we are closing to the hot season, and Fatima already spoke about the major drought which affected most of the world in 2022. 2022 was very bad for the rest of the Europe. Italy, Portugal, and Romania being the most affected countries in that year. So, from the point of view of an utility, and probably from the point of view, certainly from the point of view of the users too, intermittent water supply during drought is possibly the worst. Now, there are some worrying facts, not only the situation that we experienced ourselves, many of us firsthand, but drought is also as a factor for contributing factor to intermittent water supply, could be coupled, could be connected with other factor making the result the worse. From the 25 countries deemed by the UN most vulnerable and least ready to adapt to climate change, 14 are embroiled in conflicts. And we all know that we are witnessing wars for water. And again, millions and millions of people each year have to be helped to meet their urgent needs for water, both in conflict areas and also as an effect of climate change. These are reports of the International Committee of the Red Cross. So we spoke about the 2022, one of the worst droughts in the recent years, both in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. Now, we are starting with the basic fact that the right to water was declared by the UN as such, confirming that economic, cultural, and social rights are essential to the fulfillment of the basic human rights. And as such, there is a major endeavor to provide this right, this water as a human right. But the providing providing water supply goes both ways, both for the duty bearers, meaning authorities, utilities, other stakeholders involved in supplying the water, the drinking water, but as well as from the part of the right bearers. So, intermittent water supply obviously is a contributing factor to social inequity, which can lead to social conflict. It can affect the right to life and health. It has obviously an economic impact. Is quoted as an excessive cause for an excessive use of labor, mainly in subdeveloped country where women should procure and transport the water to their households. Now, the international documents all speak about providing clean, accessible, and affordable drinking water. Nobody speaks about free drinking water. That is something we should bear in mind, because I witnessed firsthand that some people understand the right to water as the right to free drinking water. Now, this availability of affordable water in many cases becomes unfeasible during severe climate change effects. SDG 6 aims toward increasing the water use efficiency, which is not a responsibility for water supply providers, and substantially reduce the number of people suffering from water scarcity. But water use in our day-to-day practice, and also the related awareness campaign about water use efficiency, dwindle during drought. In fact, during drought, the water consumption many times increases. In our situation, for instance, Somesh water, in 2022, the water consumption during the drought and heat wave of that year increased 6 to 10-fold. In these conditions, water supply network cannot cope. One of the major conditions for the people to be reached by awareness campaign and by communication information campaigns prompting to water use efficiency is that all those people who are affected by the heat and drought to share a major vulnerability. If there are people who are not sharing this vulnerability, they will not be affected, not feel the effects of the awareness campaigns. So for those people, accompanying enforcement measures should be in place, where the legal frame permits that. Progressive tariffs, fines for overuse, and so forth. Now, in these conditions, I think with the worsening climate change effects, I think that uninterrupted water supply should be understood as reasonable diligence for the authorities, for the water supply companies, utilities, and so forth, to provide and to ensure this human right for water. IWA, of course, had its contribution to this topic, published this manual of the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation for practitioners. And one of the recommendation in this manual is to provide a minimum number of hours a day during which water should be running from the tap and so on. Now, can this uninterrupted water supply can be achieved practically, regardless of other contributing adverse factors? There are companies which are lacking funding for network modernization. Power outages, which are not the responsibility of the water companies, also can produce intermittent water supply. As I said before, extreme climate conditions, conflict, of course, it's a major contributing factor to IWS, intermittent water supply, earthquakes, but also sizable unpaid bills endangering water supply for the entire community, endangering the financial health of the water utility. And of course, combination of the above factors. Now, as I said before, starving the utilities of revenues based on a wrong understanding of the human right for water and sanitation will potentially affect all users, leading to intermittent water supply. As I said before, this right of the people for water without interruption should be understood only as a reasonable diligence and good management, of course, in providing regular and continuous water supply. Now, in the situation of, example for a situation in which the company, the utility was starved of funding from bills, unpaid bills, which led to intermittent water supply, was the example of Detroit city, which among the first, or if not the very first city to go bankrupt in 2014. And in effort to recover financing from unpaid bills, the Water and Sewage Department cut off the water for 150,000 connections. That, of course, led to major social unrest. And the United Nations Special Rapporteur for this human right for water and sanitation, visiting Detroit at that time, declared that service interruption following unpaid bills is allowed only if it can be demonstrated that the end user have the means to pay the bill but are not willing to do so. In response, the representative of the Water and Sewage Department said that those people who did not pay the bill had their priority in paying the bills for cable TV and cell phone, but the water bill is not their priority, which is a very true situation in some cases in other water companies. Another case study is also my company, the second regional water supply. We have an integrated area supply system, which supplies drinking water to 3 municipalities and around 200 rural communities. But of course, we have a number of localities serviced by local sources, which are vulnerable to effects of climate change. So our policy was to severely extend the integrated water supply system. At regional level, we are servicing 2 neighboring counties with 8 municipalities and more than 328 rural localities. So extending through massive investment, the integrated water supply system can be a major situation which contributes to uninterrupted water supply. But all this water supply, following massive investment, which surpass 720 million euro, are worth only in normal condition of use of water. When we are talking about droughts, which in our situation in 2022 increased tenfold the consumption of water, and that water was used mainly for agricultural uses, not for domestic use, then we have a problem. No matter how much money you're pouring into investment, the system will not cope. It is not designed to cope with such increase in water consumption. The answer to that problem was not since 2022, but even before that year, to build, as I said, the longest drinking water main in Romania, to expand the nervature of the integrated water supply system. So we are building a 164 water main with a 150 kilometers of branches, which will take over all the localities which currently are depending on local sources vulnerable to climate change effects. But as I said before, no network, no matter how modern, no matter how long, no matter how technically fit, will cope with severe increase in use, especially use for non-domestic purposes. We all know about the case of Cape Town, which during 2016, 17, 18 had a major drought. The dam levels supplying the city dropped below 13.5%. So we're heading towards reaching a 13.5%, at which point the 4 million inhabitants would have been cut off from water supply, continuous water supply, and having to rely on a daily ration of only 25 liters. So the response of the authorities and the water supply responsibles was to unfold a major communication campaign, which in that situation proved to be a good one, in terms of results at least. But again, the good result of their communication campaign hinged both on the need for public cooperation, but also was based on the fact that all the people in Cape Town shared the same vulnerability, which is important for the awareness communication and awareness campaign to have its desired effect. The lessons from the City of Cape Town communication campaign in that situation, and I remind you, it was almost 3 years long communication and awareness campaign in order to avoid day zero, in which the dam would drop, the level in dams will drop below usable levels. So the learnings were that the repetition and cohesion of the messages was paramount. Also, that physical and psychological security was needed by reassuring the people that the crisis was navigated as best possible. And as I said before, unifying the public through shared vulnerability, which it happened in the case of Cape Town. Now, as a first in the recent history, the result of the communication and awareness campaign of Cape Town had as a result that the people practically cut their water usage by nearly 60% compared with 2015 levels, with each people using as little more of 50 liters per day. We are now in Europe at about 115 liters per day in normal conditions. So reaching 50 liters per day in drought condition can be reached. Also, the Americas were affected during the 2022 drought and heat wave. And they come up with the American Water Works Association come up with sort of a manual designing and evaluating effective of ongoing drought communication, which was suggested later as a guidebook of best management practices during drought and water shortage communication strategy. Now, I don't know if we can go through all the findings of this study. They are very interesting. Of course, timely and effective communication is key. The budget is not a relevant factor because a very successful information and awareness campaign were reached with a very good success with small budgets. But the use of digital communication these days is crucial, also to have a plan to maximize the resources, small or big, is also important. And by time to time during the campaign, not only at the end of the campaign, evaluation and monitoring in order to adjust the plan to any unforeseeable events affecting the unfolding of the campaign. Among the means employed to cope with drought communication were drought event websites, specialized website, optimization of the search engines, newsletters, videos, of course, which can help the community understand visually the situation, virtual meeting, a webinar, telephone marketing, QR codes for drought website, mobile application, social media, of course, is free to use resource and is essential in this period in which everybody goes to the social media to learn information or to relay information. Television news, of course, display advertisement. Geo-targeting is a very new but also very costly mean to unfold an information communication awareness campaign, as well as going for social media influencers. But the few fundamental steps which should be taken in order to shape a successful drought communication campaign could be adapted to other extreme events communication related to water supply, of course. You have to define a measurable or more measurable goals and to set a timeline. You have to know your audience, the communities which you are servicing. You might have a different community in your service area, different languages, and the breakdown of the social demographic of those target communities could be very important. The message should be clear, of course, and concise, and left no room for confusion. The budget, as I said, is not a major factor, but you do have, if you are going for publicized advertising for advertising for against money, you do have need of a budget. You must identify your internal and external partners, stakeholders, authorities, health authorities, environment authorities, and so forth. You should understand limitation and be prepared for circumstances that are outside the control when you shape your communication strategy. So you must be flexible to adapt to these changing conditions. To implement the most adequate strategy, as I said, monitoring and adjustment is equally important. Now, many other considerations should be kept in sight when devising drought communication campaign. The diversity of the community you are servicing, careful translation and cultural sensitivity in multi-language communities. Most of our communities are such today. And of course, seek community engagement, because alone you will not succeed. You as an authority and you as a water utility. In conclusion, I think that drought is and will be most likely a common condition experienced by many of us in the future. And we must always be prepared to communicate those challenges and to prompt the communities and the people, individuals, to change behavior in terms of water use efficiency as part of the solution. Message overload is a possibility when you are unfolding extreme condition communication campaign, of course, but I think the solution would be to build and foster a customer base that really understands and values long-term water conservation issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor and Fatima, for very informative talks. Very thought-provoking. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I don't see any questions in the chat. Yeah, all our participants, you are welcome to raise hand and put your comments or questions to our speakers. In the meantime, while we are waiting for some questions or hands, I've got a question. We looked at Fatima in her talk. She mentioned different types of water scarcity, drought that can have impact. And sometimes these stakeholders may have conflict of interest. Are there any special ways to engage with different stakeholders? For example, if we are in an extreme case of drought, farmers, they are trying to abstract water for their needs. We've got water companies who are trying to supply water to their customers. Different stakeholders, they've got different interests and it can be conflicting with each other. So how to communicate these to make sure challenging period passes without too much conflict of interest?
Thank you, Razia. That's a really good question. I think the national drought groups that I mentioned during my presentation, it brings together different stakeholder organizations, and the whole aim really is to cascade drought management, drought information and drought management information as well, and give that strategic direction in terms of drought management. But I also think an important way of harmonizing stakeholders with conflicting interests is to have their representation in the national drought group. So that way they can understand the national picture and the vision, really. So an example of stakeholders with conflicting interests would be, you know, our typical B&Q, for example, which is our garden centers. So it's an outlet for buying plants or things to do with gardening. And you find when we're pushing out messages about using less water, you know, using less water in the garden, whether it is the way that you use water as well in the garden, not using hose sprinklers or using watering cans, it helps to have their buying and to have them to sell it as a way to incorporate sustainability into their business, so that, of course, you know, their business is still profitable, but doing it in a sustainable way benefits them. It also is good for their branding as a business, but it's also good for their customers to learn new ways to protect the environment. So if you go to some garden centers, you will find some information on what kind of plants you're buying, how much water it would take to keep them alive, how often should you water them, or whether they're drought resistant, for example. So I think it's important about having representation and having communication about this shared vision, but also selling it as how it could benefit different parties, the customer, the public, the business, the nation as a whole.
Great, thank you. Still, I can't see any questions in the chat. Yeah, so I'll ask another question while we are still waiting for participants to raise questions. Obviously, intermittent water supply is a major challenge. It's, you know, global, and it's a very large scale problem, and it's continuous problem. It's not, and there is a danger that with drought, and we may have more regions who are going to have intermittent water supply system. Any special way of communicating this, or do you think the existing methods are applicable even if the campaign is at much larger scale? It involves a lot of different people with different socioeconomic background, with different level of education. How do we approach intermittent water supply communication, especially when we talk in some regions, for example, in some places when they are campaigning to reduce the leakage, therefore do the transmission from intermittent to continuous supply system. Some of the customers, they don't believe this is feasible or this is going to happen. Or, you know, they prefer to stay as it is because they don't know a better system. So how do we communicate to encourage them to come on board and you know, contribute to this movement to convert some of these intermittent water supply systems to continuous systems?
It's very difficult. It's not easy. I will give you two examples. More than 14 years ago, when we started the massive investment programs for network modernization, the people, we made a poll, sociological research, and the people were willing to pay up to 6 times the tariffs in effect at that time for better better network, for better water supply, for continuous water supply, and so forth. Today, they are not willing to do any more that. Not only that, but people who already benefited for infrastructure modernization are not willing to support tariff increase so that other people in other neighboring communities which do not have at this point water supply or sewage or sewage treatment, they're not willing to pay more for their neighbors to have the same conditions. So it is very difficult. In 2022, when we have the drought, for instance, we managed to supply to some point continuous water supply for the entire regional area. But in the meantime, an area where are very many farmers who use the water for agricultural purposes, and as an effect, the people at the end of the network remain without water for basic needs. And we tried to go to them, aside unfolding a major and significant awareness campaign. And when we tried to convince them to use, to have a water efficiency use behavior, they responded something to the effect, I cannot hear the call for water from my neighbor downstream, the one who remained without water for basic rights, because I'm deafened by the cry for food of my own children. If I'm not producing vegetables and I don't watering those vegetables, I remain without my subsistence. So it's a very difficult situation to produce an effective water efficiency campaign, unless, as I said so, all the people in the affected area are sharing the same vulnerability. So,
very interesting. Yes,
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I see in the chat, unfortunately, some participants couldn't join the meeting because of technical issues. Just for your information, not only this webinar, all our previous webinars have been recorded and they are available from IWA's Intermittent Water Supply Specialist Group's YouTube channel. So you will have access to the recording to watch online. And apologies for this inconvenience this time. Any questions from our participants?
And sorry, I might add that the recording will be available on our own SG on PCC YouTube page immediately after this webinar.
Yes. Any questions? If not, I would like to thank you, Victor and Fatima, for very informative talks. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. This was an excellent opportunity to learn about your activities. I hope we will continue our collaboration. For our participants, we welcome, please nominate yourself to give a talk as part of our webinar series. We are planning, as I mentioned, a couple of more joint webinars with other SGs, IWA's SG specialist groups, but individual speakers are welcome as well to contact myself or Joe. We are more than happy to schedule a talk for you if you are interested to give a talk to as part of our webinar series. Thank you again to all your participants and our speakers, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.